Do you want another world war? Well, neither did they.
And that is why the League of Nations was created. Hello, everyone,
I am Jia,
and I am Tanish.
and today we will be talking about the history of the UN. The same will be divided into four subtopics: the League of Nations, the United Nations, the differences in between the two, and finally, important dates.
The League of Nations was the first worldwide intergovernmental organization to have a principal mission of achieving world peace. We will be looking at the formulation of the League, its timeline, principles, and whether it was able to stay true to those principles or not.
The League was founded by four world superpowers, namely Italy, France, Great Britain, and the United States. The US President Woodrow Wilson was the first to acknowledge the need for an international organization such as the League of Nations.
The League of Nations was the predecessor to the United Nations, the most prominent international organization in today's day and age. The League's aim was to promote international cooperation and to achieve international peace and security. The League officially began operations on January 10, 1920. It is important to try and connect the dots about why President Woodrow Wilson emphasized on establishing the League. Why was there need for a peacekeeping organization anyway? And here's a hint: the answer lies within the League's timeline.
It's the year 1919. World War I has just ended. Leaders of the victorious Allied nations have all gathered at Versailles for the Paris Peace Conference. The purpose of the conference was to deal with the aftermath of the war. Leaders from Italy, the US, Great Britain, and France were known as the Big Four, owing to their overwhelming presence and influence on the conference's outcome and decisions. It was at this gathering that President Woodrow Wilson introduced the idea of the League of Nations to other countries' representatives. Hence, we can infer that the negative impact of World War I was what led President Wilson to wish for the establishment of the League.
The Treaty of Versailles was one of the most important products of the conference. The treaty identified Germany as the lead aggressor. It was in the conference's interest to decide the consequence Germany had to face for its role in the war. This is when the four influential leaders reached an impasse, as all four of them wanted a different degree of severity with regards to Germany's punishment. All four had been affected differently after all. For example, France, a country which had suffered deeply because of the war, wanted to deprive Germany from the right to have its own military, while the US only wished to impose financial reimbursements. It was at this point that the world governors realized the need for the League of Nations and decided to support Wilson's idea of having an international peacekeeping organization which would make decision making on international political matters easier. The Covenant for the League of Nations was hence drafted and included as part of the Treaty of Versailles. The Covenant included the League's three main objectives: to ensure collective security, to assure functional cooperation, and to execute the mandates of peace treaties.
After laying the foundation for the League and reaching an agreement with other countries, the League of Nations officially commenced operations on January 10th, 1920. As mentioned earlier, one of the reasons the League was formed was to make the decision making process with regards to international politics, and the entire idea stemmed from the four big leaders not being able to decide the punishment for Germany in the Paris Peace Conference. Hence, it was only natural for the League's establishment to be followed by the formation of the Permanent Court of Justice, International Justice, an international court which would help address disagreements between countries. It was also the first ever body to exercise law and order on an international level where all countries were on equal footing. Finally, in November 1920, the first General Assembly for the League was held. In the year 1934, the League had the maximum number of members throughout its history. It was 58 members strong. While the League was seen to be effective at resolving international conflicts for the first 15 years of its existence, it failed to effectively address the conflict between Japan and China in the year 1931. Following this, Japan did not cooperate with the League, and the Japanese representative walked out of the League Assembly in the year 1933 and said, "We are not coming back." This was a statement on its own. The League was helpless in the face of Japan's withdrawal from the League. This set up the League for failure. In the year 1939, world leaders lost faith in the League when it failed to prevent the Second World War. The League was formed after the First World War in order to prevent such a similar clash between countries. After the withdrawal of the influential members of the League, such as Germany, Italy, and Japan, when with other countries following suit, claiming that the League was no longer able to resolve international conflicts, all countries resorted to their old ways as they started dealing with international relations by themselves.
Post the devastation from World War II, the United Nations was formed as a replacement for the League of Nations, which ceased to exist in the year 1946. It is within the scope of this topic to discuss the reasons for the League's downfall in depth. First and foremost, from the very start, the League was flawed and bound to fail. While President Wilson was the one who had introduced the idea of the League of Nations to the larger public, the United States was never an official member of the League, as the US Congress did not wish to indulge in international politics. The fact that the very country that founded the League and was a world superpower was not a member was a cause of concern for other member states. Furthermore, matters were made worse when the USSR was not a member of the League for the first decade of the League's working history. Secondly, the voting structure of the League was such that there was a rule of unanimity. It expected all countries to agree with each other in order to pass a resolution. If even one country disagreed, the resolution would not pass. The need for a 100% common consensus made the working of the League impossible, as it was almost always difficult to reach agreement in the face of conflict interests.
Coming to the third cause of failure for the League. If you go back to the slide which highlighted the League's principles,
We can see that the suppression of aggressors with emphasis on joint effort from members of the League was one of the key objectives. The League aimed to achieve this through economic or military sanctions. However, we want you to connect the dots again here. The League was formed around the time of, you guessed it, the Great Depression, an economic crisis that swept the whole world. The Great Depression started with the crash of the stock market in the year 1929. This led to as much as one fourth of the labor force in industrialized countries becoming part of the unemployed population. International trade fell by 50% and there was a great deal of human suffering. It goes to say that various countries, such as the United States and Great Britain's economies, suffered a huge blow. Do you think that the members of the League at that time would be willing to impose economic sanctions? No country wished to further worsen their economy by limiting trade with any country, be it the aggressor. Furthermore, countries were still recovering from the First World War. Their military power was still in a weak state. Hence, countries were not willing to put their armies to use with regards to imposing military sanctions. The only thing that the helpless League could do was make recommendations to member states amidst conflict. The larger population was made to believe that the League was helpless in the face of crisis and aggression.
matters were made worse when an influential leader from Italy pointed out that the League was very well when sparrows shout, but no good at all when eagles fall out, hinting that all that the League could do was make recommendations instead of taking real action against aggressors. The final blow was dealt at the start of World War II as the League ceased to exist in the year 1946 following the war. Coming to the second topic, the United Nations. After having two world wars within the same 30 years, all the leaders came to the consensus that a better system was needed so as to never experience this kind of catastrophe again. Hence, multiple countries gathered in San Francisco to draft up the Charter for the United Nations.
The UN was established to serve as a replacement for the League of Nations. It aimed to achieve greater standards of international cooperation and global peace. As discussed earlier, one of the reasons the League of Nations failed was because they could not do anything or take any action against aggressors. The UN Charter seeks to address this. The Charter emphasized on the degree of justice that the organization would practice with regards to suppression of aggressors. We urge you to pause the video to read through the aims and objectives of the UN as well as the organization's principles.
Perhaps the most important topic, the differences. It is necessary for everyone to understand the differences between the structure and functionality of the League of Nations and the United Nations so as to gain an understanding of why the UN is a better version of the League. Since the League ended operations and the UN is still existing at present day stage, there is clearly something that the UN has been doing and is still doing right. We will understand what that is and what changes have caused the UN to be more successful as an international peace-seeking organization.
Just by looking at the difference in how clear the principles of the UN were from the League of Nations, we can understand why it was better than the League. As discussed earlier, the Covenant for the League of Nations was drafted at the Paris Peace Conference. The original purpose of the conference was not to draft up the Covenant, but to discuss the aftermath of the First World War. The idea for the establishment of the League of Nations was brought upon during the conference. Hence, scholars believe that the reason why the Covenant of the League of Nations is much broader and more vague than the UN Charter is because the Covenant was drafted simultaneously while several peace treaties were being discussed at the conference. It only received divided attention from world leaders. However, the San Francisco Conference had the sole purpose of drafting the UN Charter and received all the attention from various leaders. Hence, why it is believed to be more precise and comprehensive than the Covenant.
Structure wise, the League had only three organs, namely the General Assembly, the Council, and the Secretariat. The UN, however, has six organs, which include the General Assembly, the Security Council, the Secretariat, the Economic and Social Council, the Trusteeship Council, and the International Court of Justice, amongst various other subsidiary organs, commissions, and specialized agencies. We urge everyone to research more about specialized agencies that are a part of the UN. Here is a list of the same to get you started. It is also important to have a basic understanding of each of the six UN organs, their functions, and their duties. The Security Council's function is to determine the existence of a threat to the peace or an act of aggression and to recommend the action that should be taken. The Security Council has the ability to recommend the admission of new members, to take military action against an aggressor, to formulate plans to regulate arms, to call on members to apply economic sanctions, and finally to recommend an appointment of the Secretary General to the General Assembly, as well as to elect the judges for the International Court of Justice. The Security Council consists of five members, out of which five, namely China, Russia, USA, Britain, and France, are permanent members. The permanent members of the UNSC have veto powers. Veto powers allow them to block any substantive Security Council resolution from passing. This veto does not carry over into the General Assembly or any other matters. The other 10 members are elected on a regional basis for a term of 2 years. The body's presidency rotates monthly amongst its members.
The UN General Assembly is the main policy making organ of the organization. All member states are naturally a part of this organ. Any and all international issues under the UN Charter are within the scopes of the UNGA. The organ also elects the non permanent members of the Security Council and approves of the UN budget.
The UN Secretariat is led by the Secretary General. This organ carries out the day to day work of the UN. The Trusteeship Council was established to supervise the administration of trust territories as they transition from colonies to sovereign nations. However, the organ suspended its operations on 1st November 1994 when Palau, the last of the original 11 trust territories, gained its independence.
International Court of Justice is the main judicial organ of the UN. The ICJ is located at the Peace Palace in The Hague. It is also the only organ of the UN that is not located in New York. The court's role is to settle, in accordance with international law, legal disputes submitted to it by member states. The Economic and Social Council. This organ coordinates the economic and social work of the United Nations and the UN family of organizations. It also consults with non governmental organizations, thereby maintaining a vital link between the United Nations and civil society. The Council has 54 members. In essence, the organ focuses on promoting social progress and better standards of living.
Coming to the factors that make the UN a much better version of the League. We have already discussed the difference in the drafting of the documents that lay the foundation of both organizations. After the evident failure of the unanimity rule in the League of Nations, the UN follows the rule of majority, which usually expects two-thirds of the committee members to agree in order for a resolution to pass.
Earlier, we also talked about how the League of Nations was unable to take action against aggressors as it could not effectively impose any sanctions. The UN, however, is able to impose the same effectively and suppress the aggressor through joint action from the member states.
Another difference between the two organizations is the level of universality and the acceptance they achieved. The League of Nations failed to become a universally accepted organization. At its peak, it had only 58 member states. In contrast, within the UN, very few countries are left unrepresented. Presently, the UN makes up for 193 member states.
Moving on, the League of Nations was unable to give the necessary amount of attention to human rights. Understandably enough, at that time, the League focused mainly on making sure countries recovered from the First World War and no more conflicts were taking place. The UN, however, acknowledges the importance of human rights and the presence of multiple organizations within the UN that focus on the same. The UN is able to effectively address human rights issues. Furthermore, we discussed earlier how and why world leaders had abandoned the League of Nations and resorted to dealing with conflicts themselves. However, the UN makes it almost impossible for countries to resolve international conflicts using any medium other than the United Nations. Existence of local specialized agencies as part of the UN emerging from various countries, the UN has become an active part of most countries' infrastructure and has an influence on each and every country, hence making it an indispensable platform for conducting international relations.
Referencing back to the establishment of the Permanent Court of International Justice that was affiliated with the League of Nations, the justice system failed because of lack of participation and use of the medium. However, the United Nations makes it necessary for member states to act as parties to the statute of the International Court of Justice. Lastly, with regards to economic sanctions and the League of Nations failing to impose the same due to the Great Depression and lack of willingness for countries to take part in sanctions, the UN provides banking services to its members through the World Bank Group, hence making the encouragement of economic sanctions amongst member states easier.
As we draw closer to the end of the presentation, the last topic, which is important dates in the UN's history, does not need much explaining.
We urge you to pause the video and read through the slide. Everyone is also encouraged to go beyond the scopes of the video and research more about the topics we talked about. The session on Wednesday will likely test your knowledge with regards to some points covered by us in the video. Feel free to watch it again and again as many times as needed to get thorough understanding and reach out to us in case you have any questions regarding the same. This is Jia Bhargava.
And this is Tanish Arora,
Signing
signing off. Thank the gods.